I never thought my marriage would end up this way. For 10 years, I believed Emily and I had built something solid, a partnership forged in love, mutual sacrifice, and countless late-night conversations about our future. We weren't perfect, but who was? We had our arguments, sure, but I always assumed that beneath it all, we were anchored to the same foundation. But cracks don't appear suddenly. They creep in quietly, like hairline fractures in glass, invisible at first, until one day the whole thing is ready to shatter. The first time I noticed something was off, it was subtle. Emily had always been affectionate. Not overly clingy, but she had her ways. A hand on my arm when we watched TV, a kiss on the cheek before heading out for work, a laugh that bubbled up easily whenever I said something stupid. Somewhere along the line, those gestures stopped. The laughter became rarer. The kisses grew mechanical, quick pecks that felt more like routine than desire. At first, I blamed it on stress. Emily had a demanding job at a marketing firm, and lately she'd been pulling longer hours. Campaign season, she explained whenever she got home late, too exhausted to talk. I bought it. I wanted to buy it. After all, I was busy too. Running my own consultancy meant late nights, constant clients, and the stress of keeping business flowing. Maybe we were both just tired? But then came the phone calls. It started with hushed tones in the kitchen when she thought I was asleep. Her voice, usually bright and direct, dropped into this low, almost secretive register. I'd wake in bed with the faint hum of her whispers, only catching fragments. Yes, I know, just wait, not yet. The first time I brushed it off as work talk, but after the fourth or fifth night, my gut told me it wasn't. Then came the phone she suddenly guarded like a soldier with classified intel. Emily had never been secretive with her phone before. She used to leave it face up on the counter when she cooked or showered. But now, she carried it everywhere. Bathroom, kitchen, bedroom, it was glued to her. The lock screen had changed too. Longer passcode, face recognition enabled. One night while she was in the shower, I heard the faint ding of a notification. The phone was on the nightstand, screen face down. I glanced at it, not touching, just looking, and saw a preview flash for a second before it vanished. We need to finalize the details soon. No name, just a number. I didn't sleep much that night. My brain spun in circles, analyzing, questioning, doubting. Finalize what? I asked myself. A work project? A personal plan? Something innocent? But my instincts screamed otherwise. The next day at breakfast, I studied her. She avoided eye contact, her eyes flicking to her phone every few minutes. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, like she wasn't even really there with me.
I finally said, "You've been distant lately. Everything okay?" Emily looked up with a smile so polished it felt rehearsed. "Of course, just work stress. You know how it is." I wanted to believe her. God, I really did. But the way she brushed off the conversation, the way her shoulders stiffened for just a second too long, told me she was lying. Still, I told myself not to overreact. Paranoia destroys marriages as surely as infidelity does. But deep down, I felt it. Something had shifted. Something was hiding beneath the surface. That evening, after she'd gone to bed, I sat in my office, staring at our wedding photo on the wall. Emily in her ivory dress, me in a black suit, both of us beaming like fools who believed in forever. My chest ached as I whispered to myself, if she's hiding something, I'll find out. It wasn't anger yet, not rage, just a seed of suspicion. But seeds, given time, grow into things you can't ignore. And I had no idea just how poisonous this seed would become. It was a Thursday evening when the first undeniable clue landed in my lap, not because I went looking for it, but because Emily slipped up. She was in the living room, laptop open, fingers flying across the keyboard. I had just come home from a late client meeting, the kind that drained every ounce of energy from me. I kicked off my shoes quietly, not wanting to interrupt whatever she was doing. That's when I heard it. Her voice, low but urgent. "No, not yet. He doesn't know anything." My body froze mid-step. She wasn't on the phone this time. She was on a video call. Through the crack in the hallway, I saw the faint glow of her screen lighting her face. Her expression was tense, sharper than I'd ever seen it in casual conversation. She must have been using headphones because I couldn't hear the other person, but her side of the conversation was enough to send my heart into my throat. "Yes, I've got the paperwork. I just need to be smart about this. Timing is everything. If he gets suspicious, it could get messy." My blood ran cold. Paperwork? Timing? What paperwork? She closed her laptop quickly like the conversation had ended abruptly. I backed away before she saw me, slipping into the kitchen and pretending to rummage through the fridge. A minute later, she walked in, her face suddenly casual, smile perfectly pasted. "You're home early," she said lightly, kissing me on the cheek. Her lips were cool, mechanical. "Yeah, meeting wrapped up faster than expected," I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady. She grabbed a glass of water, humming to herself, as if the last 60 seconds hadn't just planted a grenade in my chest. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling in the dark, while Emily's steady breathing beside me sounded almost mocking. Paperwork. He doesn't know anything. If he gets suspicious. Those words looped in my head until I could almost hear them etched into the silence. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do in my marriage. I snooped. Not on her phone. That was impossible now, with her guarding it like a hawk. But her laptop? She often left it in the living room when she went to bed. That night, when she was asleep, I crept out of bed and carefully opened it. The screen lit up, asking for her password. I cursed silently. She'd changed it. But here's the thing. Emily was clever, but she wasn't paranoid. I tried her birthday. No luck. Our wedding anniversary? Wrong again. Finally, I typed in the name of our dog, Max, who'd passed away years ago, but who she'd loved dearly.
The screen unlocked. My hands shook as I navigated her files. Most of it was normal. Work documents, personal photos, random downloads. But buried inside a folder titled Receipts, I found a PDF with a bland, unassuming name. Consultation Parabadoc. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a legal consultation document from a divorce attorney. My wife had already met with one. The header had the law firm's name, the date, 3 weeks ago, and Emily's name right there at the top. The document outlined the basics: her assets, my assets, what she would be entitled to, the steps forward. Half of everything. That's what she was after. My hands clenched into fists as I scrolled through the document. It was clinical, cold, and calculating. There was nothing in it about love or respect or the 10 years we'd spent together. Just numbers. Just strategy. Just betrayal. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. She was planning to leave me. Not just leave me, gut me. Take the life we'd built, strip me of what I'd earned, and walk away with half of it like I was nothing more than a failed business deal. And all the while, she smiled at me over breakfast, kissed me goodnight, asked me about my day, pretended. That was the part that cut the deepest. Not just the betrayal itself, but the performance, the act, The mask she wore so perfectly while planning to stab me in the back. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to shake her awake and demand answers, but some instinct, some cold, primal instinct stopped me. No, not yet. If she was preparing for a war, then I would prepare too. And unlike her, I wouldn't make the mistake of underestimating my opponent. That night, as I lay awake beside her, I whispered to myself, "She thinks she's playing chess. She has no idea she's already on my board."
For the next few days, I played my role as carefully as Emily played hers. She smiled, I smiled. She asked about my day, I answered. We laughed at the same empty jokes, sat at the same dinner table, and climbed into the same bed every night. But beneath the surface, I was a storm waiting to break. I couldn't let her know what I'd discovered, not yet. If she suspected that I had seen the consultation papers, she might accelerate her plan, pull the trigger before I was ready. No, I had to bide my time, watch her, study her, learn the full extent of her betrayal before I made my move. And so, I began to notice things I had ignored before. Her late nights at work had become more frequent. She often left the house with her laptop bag, but returned without so much as a fresh document to show for it. Her phone buzzed constantly, muted notifications she never let me see. She even started dressing differently, sharper, more polished, like someone preparing for an interview or a new life. One night, while she was in the shower, I heard her phone buzz again on the nightstand. For a brief moment, the screen lit up before fading. My chest tightened. The preview showed a text, "Don't worry, we'll finalize everything soon. You'll be free." Free. The word echoed in my head. Free from what? From me? From our marriage? I clenched my fist so hard my nails bit into my palms. I wanted to grab her phone, unlock it, and uncover everything, but I forced myself to step back. No, not recklessly, not yet. Instead, I turned my attention to places she wasn't guarding. The mail, the trash, her laptop whenever she slipped up and left it unattended. And it didn't take long to strike gold. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home early from a client meeting. Emily's car wasn't in the driveway. She wouldn't be home for hours. On her desk, her laptop sat closed, but next to it was a thin manila envelope. I hesitated for all of 2 seconds before sliding it open. Inside were copies of bank statements. Not ours, mine. My accounts, my investments, my business holdings. She had somehow gotten her hands on them. At the bottom was a note in her handwriting. "Need full disclosure of his assets. Attorney says court will require complete transparency. No hidden accounts." My stomach dropped. She wasn't just thinking about leaving, she was strategizing to strip me clean. She was already working with her lawyer to map out every corner of my financial life. I set the papers back exactly as I found them, but my hands were trembling. The image of her calmly stirring her coffee in the morning while secretly planning my financial execution burned into my brain. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came later that night. Emily had fallen asleep early, claiming exhaustion. I stayed in my office, pretending to finish some work, though in reality, my mind was racing. Around midnight, I heard her phone vibrate. A new message. Curiosity ate me like acid. I walked into the bedroom, careful not to wake her, and glanced at the phone on the nightstand. For once, the screen stayed long enough for me to read.
"Once he's served, there's no going back. Be ready." Served. The word hit me like a bullet. My wife wasn't just considering divorce anymore, she was ready to execute.
ready to file, ready to blindside me with papers, take half of everything I'd worked for, and walk away as if the last decade meant nothing. I stood there in the dim glow of the phone screen, staring at her as she slept peacefully beside me. How long had she been planning this? Weeks? Months? Longer? The rage that boiled in me was sharp, white-hot, but underneath it was something colder. Calculation. She thought she was the only one with a plan. She thought she'd corner me, drag me into court like some clueless fool, and walk away victorious. But she'd underestimated me. Because if Emily wanted a war, she was going to get one. And I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to make sure that when this was over, she'd be the one left with nothing. I whispered to myself, barely audible over her steady breathing. You won't see it coming, Emily. Not until it's too late. And in that moment, the first outlines of my counterplan began to take shape.
The morning after I saw that text, something inside me snapped into focus. The fear, the disbelief, the heartbreak, all of it hardened into resolve. If Emily wanted to play dirty, I'd go darker. If she wanted to strip me of everything, I'd make sure she left with nothing but regret. But the trick wasn't rage. Rage is sloppy. Rage leaves evidence. No, the key was patience and precision. I had to move quietly, like a surgeon with a scalpel. One wrong cut, and she'd smell blood. So, I began my performance. At breakfast, I kissed her cheek, asked about her day, and even laughed at her shallow jokes. Emily's smile carried that same fake warmth as always, but now I knew the truth lurking underneath it. And because I knew, I played my role flawlessly. She believed I was blind, oblivious, walking straight into her trap. Meanwhile, behind her back, I began building my escape hatch. The first step was the assets. If Emily thought she had a full picture of my finances, she was already a step behind. That Friday, I scheduled a meeting with an old friend of mine, Robert, a financial advisor who owed me more than one favor. We met in his private office far from the firm's main building. "Mike," he said, raising an eyebrow after I laid out my request, "you're asking me to move nearly half your liquid assets into a blind trust. Quietly. That's not exactly standard procedure." I leaned forward. "I don't need standard. I need invisible. Think of it as insurance." Robert hesitated, but after a long pause, he nodded. "I can make it happen, but once it's moved, it's untouchable in the traditional sense. If you need it back quickly, I won't." I cut him off. "Just make sure it's somewhere no one can find it, especially not a divorce attorney." Within a week, a significant portion of my wealth had been transferred into accounts Emily would never uncover. Offshore holdings, layered through LLCs, disguised so thoroughly that even the most aggressive lawyer would hit a wall of dead ends. The second step was appearances. I needed to look like the same loving, clueless husband she thought she was deceiving. So I leaned into it. I brought her flowers one evening, took her out to dinner at her favorite restaurant, smiled and listened as she babbled about her busy week at work. She looked at me across the table with that polished grin, no doubt congratulating herself on how well she was hiding her betrayal. She had no idea that I was already dismantling her victory before it even began. The third step was information. If she could dig into my life, then I would dig into hers. While she showered one evening, I slipped her phone into my office and connected it briefly to my computer. With a simple extraction program, one I'd used years ago during a fraud investigation, I pulled her text logs and emails. What I found confirmed everything I feared, but it also gave me something else: ammunition.
Emily wasn't just working with her lawyer. She was working with someone else, a man. His messages were scattered between the legal discussions, cloaked in vague terms but dripping with intimacy. After it's over, we'll finally be together. Don't worry, he'll never see it coming. We just need to hold out a little longer. My chest tightened as I read them, betrayal upon betrayal. Not only was she planning to gut me financially, she was already preparing her next life with him. For a moment, the urge to confront her burned hot and raw, to throw her phone in her face and watch the mask crack. But again, I forced myself to stay still.
No, not yet. The more she believed she was winning, the deeper she'd walk into the trap I was building. So I saved the messages, encrypted them, and stored them somewhere she'd never find. Proof, evidence, weapons I'd use when the time was right. And then, I began laying the groundwork for her downfall. It started subtly. A conversation with a lawyer of my own, one far sharper than the hack she'd consulted. A quiet transfer of property titles into business entities Emily's name would never touch. Even the house we lived in was shifted beneath her nose. Piece by piece, I dismantled the foundation of her plan. By the time she was ready to strike, her blade would cut nothing but air. And still, at night, I lay beside her, listening to her even breathing as she slept. She looked peaceful, innocent even. But I knew better. Behind those closed eyes was a schemer, a liar, a woman rehearsing the day she thought she'd shatter me. She had no idea that by the time she pulled the trigger, the gun would already be empty. And I whispered to the dark ceiling, as though daring fate itself, "Go ahead, Emily. Play your game. Because when you finally make your move, it'll already be checkmate."
Deception is a delicate art. It's like holding a mask in place while walking through fire. Any crack, any flicker, and the flames burn you alive. For weeks, I'd worn mine flawlessly. I was still the doting husband, the attentive partner, the man who had no idea his wife was plotting to gut him from the inside out. And Emily bought it. At least, at first. But I could feel it. The faint shift in her tone. The way her eyes lingered on me a little too long, as though searching for something beneath my calm smile. The mask wasn't cracking, not yet, but she was pressing her hand against it, testing its strength. It began on a Tuesday evening. I came home with takeout. Chinese, her favorite. I set the bags on the counter, cracked open a beer, and tried to look casual. Emily appeared in the doorway, her hair tied back, her face clean of makeup. "You're in a good mood," she said, her voice light but cautious. "Why wouldn't I be?" I smiled, opening the containers. "It's been a good day. Figured we could have a little treat." She tilted her head. "You've been different lately." I froze for a fraction of a second before I forced a chuckle. "Different? How?" "I don't know." She shrugged, but her eyes didn't leave mine. Lighter? Like something's on your mind. Something you're not telling me. The air between us tightened, sharp as wire. I felt the edges of panic pressing in, but I could bury it. I couldn't let her suspect, not now. So I reached across the counter, brushed my fingers against hers, and softened my voice. "You're imagining things. Maybe I'm just remembering why I married you." Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, before she laughed and pulled her hand away. But I saw it. Doubt. Suspicion. That night, while she scrolled on her phone in bed, I pretended to drift into sleep. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes closed, but every nerve was awake watching her through the darkness. And sure enough, I felt her shift. Slowly, carefully, she turned to look at me. I could feel her gaze on my face, steadying, searching. It lasted only a moment before she slipped out of bed, padded quietly into the hallway, and shut the bathroom door. I waited until I heard her soft tap of her phone keyboard. Messaging him. Her co-conspirator. Maybe even her lawyer. The knot in my chest tightened. She was starting to sense the shift, and that meant I needed to double down. The next day, I played the perfect fool. I made mistakes on purpose. I left a utility bill on the counter with the wrong balance circled. I asked her to remind me of the password to one of our joint accounts, pretending I'd forgotten. I even mentioned in passing that I was worried about money lately. It worked. I saw her relax, her shoulders loosening as she believed her narrative again. In her mind, I was still the unsuspecting husband, too clumsy and trusting to see the knife in her hand. But the mask had to be flawless every second of every day. And living like that, lying in plain sight, knowing she was dissecting every smile, every word, it wore on me. It hollowed me out.
By Friday night, I found myself standing in the shower, water scalding against my skin, staring at the tile as I whispered to myself, "Hold it together, just a little longer. Don't let her see you crack." Because the truth was, she was close. Too close. If Emily pushed harder, if she dug even a little deeper, she might see through the mask. And if that happened before my plan was complete, I clenched my fists against the tile, the steam curling around me. No, I wouldn't let that happen. I dried off, stepped back into the bedroom, and there she was, sitting up in bed, eyes on me. She smiled faintly, but the weight of her stare said something else entirely. "You're awfully quiet tonight," she murmured. I met her gaze, steady and calm, my mask firmly in place. "Just tired," I said softly. "Nothing to worry about." And I slipped under the covers beside her, my heart pounding, my mind already racing with the next moves I had to make. Because one thing was clear: if Emily had started to suspect me, then the war had already begun. Deception, no matter how precise, is never indestructible. The longer you wear a mask, the heavier it becomes. And eventually, someone will tug at the edges, just to see what's underneath. Emily tugged. It began with small things, subtle but deliberate. A misplaced question at dinner, a probing comment that seemed harmless but carried a hidden blade. One night she asked casually, "Do you still check the bank accounts like you used to, or do you just let me handle that now?" I smiled, keeping my voice light. "Honestly, you're better with numbers than I am. Why stress myself?" She nodded, too quickly. The next morning, my watch was gone. Not stolen, just moved. I found it sitting in the kitchen drawer, far from the nightstand where I always left it. A test. She wanted to see if I'd notice. So, I didn't. I slipped it on without a word, acting as though nothing was out of place. The second test came a week later. I walked into the study and found one of my file drawers slightly ajar. Inside was an old stack of tax returns, harmless but organized in a way only I knew. She'd been digging, her curiosity masked as clumsiness. Again, I said nothing. I made tea, brought her a cup, kissed her cheek, pretending I hadn't noticed her fingerprints all over my life. But then came the boldest move. One evening, as we sat in the living room, she turned to me with a smile too sharp to be casual. "Mike," she said, "if you ever thought I was hiding something from you, what would you do?" The words landed like a stone dropped into deep water. For a heartbeat, I froze. But then I laughed, genuine enough to pass, hollow enough to hide my dread. "I don't know," I said lightly. "Depends on what you were hiding. Another Amazon package? I'd forgive you. Another man? Maybe I'd have to start watching daytime talk shows to figure out how husbands are supposed to react." She laughed too, but her eyes never softened. She was studying me, dissecting every flicker in my expression. And for the first time, I wondered if she sensed the game. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the faint glow of the streetlight bleeding through the curtains. Emily was probing me. She wasn't content with waiting for her plan to unfold. She was restless, impatient. Maybe her secret partner was pushing her to move faster, or maybe she'd simply felt a shift in the air between us. Either way, it meant danger. Because if she pressed too hard, too soon, before my moves were complete, the entire structure of my plan could collapse. So, I did something I hadn't intended to do just yet. I planted my own test. The next morning, I accidentally left a folder sitting on my desk, half buried under some papers. Inside was a deliberately fabricated financial statement, one that suggested I still had large, easily accessible funds sitting in an account I'd already drained.
I went to work. When I returned that evening, the folder had been moved. Not by much, just enough. And Emily? She was humming in the kitchen. Too cheerful, too light on her feet. She'd taken the bait. I smiled to myself as I kissed her cheek. For now, the mask held. For now, she believed I was still the oblivious husband she could gut without resistance. But deep down, I knew something had shifted again. The game was no longer silent. It was spoken, in looks and pauses, in questions and traps. We were circling each other in the dark, each pretending not to see the knife in the other's hand. And sooner or later, one of us would cut first.
Every war has a first shot. Sometimes it's a bullet. Sometimes it's a whisper. In my case, it was a piece of paper. I came home one Friday evening to find Emily sitting at the dining table with 2 wine glasses poured, a half-empty bottle between them. She looked radiant, not the soft, familiar glow of my wife, but something sharper, triumphant. "Mike," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her, "we need to talk." Those 4 words, the ones every married man dreads. But I smiled, lowered myself into the chair, and let her believe she had control. She slid a manila envelope across the table. I opened it slowly, my face carefully neutral. Inside, draft divorce papers. Clean, professional, unassuming. But the knife was in the fine print. Division of assets. Alimony. Her lawyer's fingerprints all over the wording. "I didn't want it to come to this," Emily said softly, though her eyes gleamed with victory. "But we've grown apart. It's better for both of us this way." She was lying. She wasn't sad. She wasn't hesitant. She was reveling in it. This was her move, her first strike. I let my jaw tighten, just a fraction, as though I was holding back shock. "Divorce?" I said hoarsely. "Emily, what are you talking about?" Her expression softened, almost pitying. Almost. "It's for the best, Mike, really. We'll split things fairly. You'll be okay." Fairly. I almost laughed. Fair meant she got the house, half the retirement accounts, and more than a comfortable cushion to rebuild her life, while I was left to pick up the pieces. But I didn't laugh. I let my shoulders sag, my hand tremble slightly as I set down the papers. I don't understand," I whispered. "We were fine." She reached across the table, placed her hand over mine, warm, fake. "You'll see, it'll be better this way, for both of us." That was her fatal mistake. She thought I was broken, that I would fold, and because of that, she didn't see the satisfaction burning behind my eyes. I nodded slowly, deliberately, the mask still tight against my face. If that's what you want." Relief washed over her features. She thought the hardest part was over. She thought I'd already surrendered. But as she sipped her wine, her lips curling in quiet triumph, I knew something she didn't. The assets she thought she'd claim were already gone. The accounts she thought were flush were shells. The house she assumed she'd take without contest, tied up in trusts, obscured behind paperwork she didn't know existed. She thought she'd pulled the trigger, but really she'd just stepped onto the trapdoor I had been building for months. And when it opened beneath her, there would be no way back up. That night, while she slept soundly beside me, I sat in the dark and studied the papers again. Not with fear, not with despair, but with precision. Every clause, every demand, every word was a map, and now I knew exactly how far she was willing to go. She believed the game had started, but in truth, it was already over.
Divorce is a game of illusion. The one who controls the narrative controls the outcome. Emily thought she had the upper hand with her neat little packet of papers. She believed she had cornered me, that I would stumble blindly into the legal slaughterhouse she and her lawyer had prepared. She had no idea she was walking straight into my theater. The morning after she served me her intentions, Emily was cheerful. She hummed while she brewed her coffee, kissed my cheek like nothing had changed. She thought I was stunned, docile, too busy licking my wounds to notice how smug she had become. But while she hummed, I moved, quietly, surgically. Step 1. I contacted my lawyer. Not the average suburban divorce attorney. No, I had hired mine months ago, back when her late-night whispers and hidden smiles told me something was rotting beneath the surface of our marriage. He specialized in asset protection, the kind of man who could make entire fortunes vanish behind walls of trusts, corporations, and offshore accounts. Emily's papers claimed half the house, but she didn't know the deed was no longer in our names. Months earlier, I had quietly transferred ownership into a trust controlled by a separate entity. Legally speaking, neither of us owned it, and you can't divide what doesn't exist on paper. Step 2. the accounts. She believed there were retirement funds, savings accounts, and stock portfolios ripe for division. What she didn't know was that those accounts had been methodically drained, converted, and rerouted. A shell company, one she couldn't trace to me without years of forensic work, now held what she thought was hers. Step 3. Evidence. Emily wanted to paint herself as the devoted wife, the wronged partner who had simply fallen out of love. But I had been documenting, quietly, patiently, every suspicious move she'd made, her late-night calls, her whispered arguments with someone she thought I didn't know about, the texts I'd intercepted from the backup cloud she forgot existed. There was no affair, not yet, but there were plans. Plans to leave me for greener pastures once she'd bled me dry. And in family court, intent is razor. Step 4. Silence. The most important one. I didn't confront her. I didn't let her know I had seen through her mask. I let her bask in her illusion of victory. Because nothing sharpens the knife like an enemy who doesn't know the blade is already pressed against their throat. Days turned into weeks. She became bolder, more affectionate in public, almost smug about how well she was handling things. Friends began to notice her confidence, her glow. Meanwhile, I pulled threads, quietly canceling her access to certain accounts, redirecting mail, preparing motions through my attorney that she would never see coming. And then I did something she didn't expect at all. I agreed. One evening, as she rehearsed her speech about amicable separation over dinner, I nodded. If this is what you want, Emily, I'll cooperate. No fighting, no bitterness. Let's just do it clean. Her eyes widened, just for a flicker, then softened with relief. She believed I was defeated, that I'd given up without a fight. She poured more wine, smiled sweetly, and said, "Thank you, Mike. This means everything. We can still respect each other through this." Respect. The word tasted like poison in my mouth. But I raised my glass and clinked hers anyway. Because I wasn't fighting the divorce. I was fighting her. And by the time the papers were signed, she would discover that she wasn't walking away with half my world. She was walking away with nothing.
The morning started like any other. Emily was bright, cheerful, confident, completely unaware of how close she was to losing everything she thought she had. She had served me her papers. She had believed she had me cornered, and she had begun rehearsing her victory speech in the privacy of our home. She didn't know that the board had already been flipped, that her carefully laid plans were about to implode. I was calm, as always. I poured my coffee and slid into my chair opposite her. She smiled, radiant, victorious, utterly unsuspecting. "I spoke with my lawyer last night," she said, voice laced with satisfaction. "Everything's set. We'll just finalize the details next week." I sipped my coffee slowly, studying her. Every flicker in her eyes, every subtle curve of her lips, all pretending innocence. My mask was steady, my smile casual. "Good," I said lightly. "I'm glad we're on the same page." She beamed at me, completely oblivious. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do just yet. Something that would make her entire world tilt. I reached into my laptop bag, pulled out the statements, and spread them across the table. Her face, confident seconds ago, froze. "These are," she stammered. "Everything," I said evenly. "Every account you thought you could claim, every investment, every property. It's all
moved. She blinked. Moved? What do you mean? I leaned back, letting the silence stretch, thick and suffocating. The house isn't in our names anymore. The accounts you thought were there, gone. All of it, legally protected, untouchable. Even your lawyer can't access it. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. You knew? She whispered, finally, horror creeping into her voice. I knew, I said, simply. From the moment I realized what you were planning, I prepared, step by step. Every move you made, I anticipated. Every plan, every intention, already neutralized. Her hands shook as she reached for the papers, scanning them frantically. This isn't possible. I stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the morning sun lit the garden, the flowers we had planted together a decade ago. She was still kneeling, staring at the table, realizing that every move she thought was clever had been countered, every plan neutralized. I guess this is what they call a cold wake-up call, I said, voice low but controlled. You wanted a divorce, Emily. You wanted half my life, half my world. But you underestimated me. Her face was pale, a mask of shock and disbelief. She had spent weeks plotting, believing herself untouchable. And now, in the quiet, sterile light of our dining room, she was nothing.